The gavel came down at 11 minutes past 9 on the morning of March 4th, 1971, and the last bid standing was $70. The man who placed it did not cheer. He was standing near the back of the crowd. Maybe 40 people gathered in the cold outside the old Harlan County Federal Land Administration building in Drennan, West Virginia, a town so small it did not appear on the state map printed after 1958. The temperature was 31 degrees. The sky was the color of old iron. A few of the men had their breath coming out in slow, steady clouds, the way cattle breathe. The agent from the General Services Administration, a man named Clifford Pruitt, laughed when the auctioneer read the final number back. He laughed out loud. He turned to the man beside him, a county real estate broker in a good wool coat, and said something that made the broker laugh too. Then a few others laughed because Clifford Pruitt was laughing, and that is the way a crowd does. The man who had placed the $70 bid said nothing. His name was Earl Mabry. He was 61 years old, 5 feet 9 inches tall, built like a man who had spent 40 years lifting things other men would not. His hands were wide, and the knuckles were enlarged from an early arthritis that had come in around 1963 and never fully left. He wore a canvas work coat, faded from olive to the color of dry grass, and a wool cap he had owned since the Eisenhower years. Under his left thumbnail was a permanent line of dark grease that no amount of washing had ever removed in the past 2 decades. He did not look at Clifford Pruitt. He looked at the door. It was a vault door, salvage tagged, and listed on the auction sheet as Lot 22F, government surplus, interior security door, condition unknown. It stood approximately 5 feet tall and 3 feet wide. It was made of poured steel, and it weighed, according to the manifest, somewhere between 340 and 360 pounds. The face of it was painted in what had been federal gray, now oxidized to a pale brown-green in the upper corners, with a single recessed handlebar and a 4-digit combination dial that had been painted over at some point, then partially scraped clean again. The dial no longer turned. Everyone else had seen a broken door, too heavy to move. Earl Mabry had seen the seam. Along the left edge of the door frame, where the hinges were set into the old concrete wall, there was a compression seal, a thin bead of vulcanized rubber, still partially intact after however many years. It had not been installed on an empty vault. He had learned that a long time ago. Earl Mabry had worked for the federal government for 31 years, from 1934 to 1965, as a facilities maintenance specialist for the General Land Administration in Harlan County and the 3 counties adjacent to it. The title was bureaucratic. The work was not. He was the man they called when the building needed to breathe again, when the pipes froze, or the boiler cracked, or the locks seized from disuse. He had, in those 31 years, opened or repaired 412 locks of various kinds, padlocks, deadbolts, combination mechanisms, pressure seals, and 7 vault doors across the region, ranging from a small document safe in a county assessor's office to a floor-level treasury lock in the basement of the federal building in Beckley. He had a mentor, a man named Roy Calvert, who had worked government facilities since Prohibition and who told Earl once, in the summer of 1936, that a lock is not a wall. It is a conversation. You just have to know which words to use. Roy Calvert had been dead since 1958, but Earl still heard him sometimes. He had retired in 1965 when the agency reorganized and moved its regional operations to Charleston. They had thanked him with a certificate in a cardboard frame and a handshake from a man he had never met before and never saw again. The certificate was in a box in his basement. He had not framed it. Since retiring, he had spent 6 years doing what he had always done on weekends, attending government surplus auctions, purchasing salvage items that no one else could identify or move, and restoring them. He had repaired and resold 2 decommissioned postal scales, a federal water meter array, a set of filing cabinets with broken locking bars, and a decommissioned radio dispatch console that a sheriff's department in Ohio had paid $410 for in 1969. He drove a 1961 Dodge pickup, dark green, with a rebuilt rear axle and a flatbed he had reinforced himself with angle iron. The truck had 104,000 miles on it. It ran fine. He was not a collector. He was not a treasure hunter. He was a man who understood the language of things that had been built to last and then left behind. When a room full of people looked at a vault door and saw junk, Earl Mabry looked at the same door and heard it still speaking. Clifford Pruitt was 44 years old and 6 feet 1 inch tall. He wore a charcoal wool overcoat and a tie with a small geometric pattern. His shoes were leather-soled and not suited for standing on frozen ground, which was why he shifted his weight every few minutes and looked at his watch more than the auction required. He drove a 1970 Ford LTD, dark blue, which was parked on the road where everyone could see it from the auction grounds. He was a regional property disposal officer for the General Services Administration out of Charleston. He had been disposing of federal surplus for 11 years. He had an opinion about most things. His opinion about Lot 22F was that it was an embarrassment to the manifest. He had said so before the auction began, to the auctioneer, and to 2 of the real estate men who had driven up from Fayetteville. He had called the vault door the old junk lid. He had said it had probably been empty since Truman was in office, and that whoever bid on it would spend more hauling it away than anything inside was worth. When Earl's $70 bid held, Pruitt had laughed. He said to the broker beside him, "Old maintenance man just bought himself the heaviest regret in Harlan County." The crowd laughed. Earl signed the transfer paperwork. He did not look up. Now, if you have ever seen a man who knew exactly what he was doing get laughed out of a room by a man who did not, subscribe to this channel. Because the people who stay for stories like Earl Mabry's are exactly who this channel was built for. The auctioneer, a local man named Gibbs who had run auctions in 3 counties for 20 years, told his wife that night that the old maintenance man had looked at that door the way a doctor looks at an x-ray, like he was reading something nobody else could see. Gibbs's wife said, "Probably just a stubborn old man who doesn't know when to stop." She was wrong. The Harlan County Federal Land Administration Building had been constructed in 1938 under the Public Works Administration, one of several hundred such structures built across Appalachia during the Roosevelt years. It was a 2-story brick building with federal stone trim and a basement level that had been designed for document storage and 1 secured room. The secured room was built in 1941, when wartime land surveys and mineral rights records for the coal-bearing regions of southern West Virginia had become sensitive enough to warrant a vault. The door was installed in September of that year by a crew from a Pittsburgh manufacturer that no longer existed by 1960. It was rated for a 60-year structural life. The man who sealed the vault was a land administration supervisor named Harold Can. He was 40 years old in 1953, the year he placed the last items inside and turned the dial for the final time. Harold Can had been managing mineral rights disputes in Harlan and McDowell counties since 1946, and had accumulated, over 7 years, a set of documents and materials related to a long-running federal arbitration over coal subsurface rights involving 4 families and the federal government. The case had been scheduled for federal court in April 1954. Harold Can had died of a cardiac event in February of that year. The arbitration was transferred to another office. The documents in the vault were noted in a transfer memo and then, somehow, not transferred. The memo was misfiled. The new supervisor assumed the vault was empty. The key combination, 4 digits, written on a card, was in Harold Can's desk, which was cleared and the contents discarded. The vault sat for 18 years. No one had been inside it since the night of November 14th, 1953, when Harold Can had set a canvas satchel on the floor and turned the dial left, then right, then left again, and pulled the handle down and heard it seat. He had believed someone would come for it. Earl Mabry was 61 years old, and he had worked in buildings like this one for 31 years, and he understood something about what a sealed room means. It means someone believed what was inside was worth protecting. That belief does not expire just because the man who held it does. It took Earl 2 hours and the help of his neighbor's tractor to load the vault door onto the flatbed. The door was still attached to a section of the original frame, which they had to break free from the concrete with a sledgehammer and a cold chisel. Earl paid his neighbor $12 for the morning's work. He drove home at 35 miles an hour on Route 16, 31 miles from Drennan, to his property outside of Whitesville. The flatbed rode low. He could see it in the mirrors. He took the curves wide. By the time he reached the county road that ran past his house, word had moved ahead of him. His neighbor's wife had told two women at the post office that Earl Mabry had bought the old vault door off the federal building for $70, and that Clifford Pruitt had laughed at him in front of everyone. One of those women told her son. By 3 p.m, for men had driven past Earl's property slowly enough to see the door sitting in the open garage on a section of plywood he'd laid down to protect the floor. Earl did not wave to them. He set up his work light, a single 100-watt bulb on a drop cord, and pulled his stool close. He laid out his tools on a folded piece of canvas, a set of drill bits in graduated sizes, a punch, 2 cans of penetrating oil, a set of hardened picks, a rubber mallet, and the small mechanic's mirror he had carried since 1948. He turned off the radio. The garage was quiet except for the wind coming under the side door. He studied the dial for 20 minutes before he touched it. The paint fill had cracked in a pattern that told him the dial had last been moved deliberately, not forced. He could see, under the cracked gray, the ghost of the original markings. He applied penetrating oil to the dial housing and to the handlebar. He waited 45 minutes. He heated the handlebar lightly with a propane torch, not to melt anything, just to expand the metal a few thousandths of an inch. He waited again. The first attempt to move the dial produced nothing. It was fully seized. He applied more oil and went inside and ate a cold supper and came back out at 9:15 in the evening. The second attempt moved the dial 3 degrees. He worked by feel after that. 31 years of handling locks had left him with a sensitivity in his fingertips that he could not explain to anyone who had not spent decades doing the same thing. He could feel the faint mechanical indexing through the frozen mechanism the way a doctor feels a pulse, not loudly, but unmistakably. His left knee ached from the cold and from kneeling. He shifted on the stool and kept working. At 11:43 in the evening, on his third sustained attempt, he felt the final tumbler seat. The sound was not a bang. It was a single low click, the way a well-made cabinet door seats in its frame. That was all. He did not pull the handle yet. He sat back on the stool and looked at the door. His hands were resting on his thighs. The 100-watt bulb threw a hard shadow behind the dial. He could feel his own pulse in his fingertips and in the enlarged knuckles of his left hand. He thought about Harold Cann, whose name he did not yet know, and about whoever had put things inside this door and believed they would be retrieved. He thought about his own father, who had worked a coal seam in McDowell County from 1921 to 1939 and never owned anything he could leave behind. He pulled the handle down. The seal broke with a low, sustained exhale. Not dramatic, just pressure equalizing across 18 years. The air that came out was cold and carried the smell of old paper, mineral oil, and something faintly metallic, the way the inside of the safe deposit box smells when it has been closed long enough to forget the world outside. Earl did not reach in. He sat and looked at the darkness inside the door for nearly 5 minutes. The light from the drop cord did not reach the back. He could see the edge of a canvas satchel and what appeared to be a flat wooden box. He sat and looked, and the garage was silent, and outside the wind had stopped, and somewhere in the trees at the edge of his property an owl called once and did not call again. Then he put on his reading glasses, stood up slowly, and reached inside. He brought things out one at a time and set each one on the plywood beside the door before taking the next. The flat wooden box first. It was 12 inches by 8, half an inch thick, with a small brass clasp. Inside were 47 mineral rights certificates, each one stamped with the federal seal and the names of 4 families: Hensley, Markham, Doss, and Kane, dated between 1946 and 1952, each one notarized. The total assessed land value represented across the 47 certificates, calculated at 1953 federal appraisal rates, was listed on an accompanying summary sheet: $214,000. Earl set the box down and looked at it. Then the canvas satchel. Inside the satchel, a leather-bound ledger of arbitration notes, a government-issue wax envelope sealed with tape, and at the bottom of the satchel, wrapped in oilcloth, a smaller envelope with a handwritten address on the front. He opened the wax envelope last. Inside was a single folded letter, written on federal stationery in a careful, unhurried hand. It was dated November 14th, 1953. It began, To whoever opens this door, these records belong to 4 families who did not receive what was owed to them. The federal government has their mineral rights. This file is the proof of it. Please see that it reaches the right hands. It was signed, Harold E. Cann, Land Administration Supervisor, Harlan County, WV. Earl read it once. Then he folded it carefully along the old creases and set it on top of the wooden box. He sat down on the stool. He sat there for a long time. The bulb hummed. The cold came up through the floor. Somewhere in the house, a faucet dripped. He had been doing this work, in one form or another, for 31 years. He had opened boxes with nothing in them and boxes with things so ordinary they made him sad. He had never opened anything that asked something of him. He took his glasses off, cleaned them on his shirt, put them back on. Then he went inside and made a pot of coffee and sat at the kitchen table until 2 in the morning, reading the ledger. He drove to the county seat the next morning at 7:15. He brought the wooden box, the ledger, the wax envelope, and Harold Cann's letter. He drove 44 miles. He did not call ahead. He set everything on the desk of the Harlan County probate clerk, a woman named Doris Fitch, who had worked that desk for 19 years. He said, "These belong to 4 families. There are names in the ledger." He did not say anything else. He drove home. Doris Fitch spent the next 3 days locating the living heirs of the Hensley, Markham, Doss, and Kane families. The mineral rights certificates, once entered into the federal arbitration system through a Charleston attorney who agreed to take the case on contingency, resulted in a settlement filed in September 1972. The families received a combined $480,000 in back value assessment and federal land compensation, apportioned across 18 living heirs. Clifford Pruitt learned about it the way most people in Harlan County learned, through other people, in stages, over weeks. He did not comment publicly. He was transferred to the GSA regional office in Lexington, Kentucky, in the spring of 1972. He retired early in 1976. Those who knew him said he had grown quieter in those years. Not broken, just quieter. He had not been a bad man. He had simply been wrong, loudly, in front of people, and the record of it did not go away. Earl Mabry was offered a finder's fee by the attorney handling the case. He declined it. He had not been offered one before and would have been embarrassed by either answer, but he knew which one was right. Harold Cann's letter was photocopied and placed in the files of all 4 family settlements. The original was donated to the Harlan County Historical Society, where it is kept in an acid-free sleeve in a flat drawer. Earl went back to work the same afternoon Doris Fitch called to tell him the case had been filed. He had 2 postal scales to recondition and a filing cabinet with a broken lock bar that someone in Raleigh County wanted restored. Today, in the reading room of the Harlan County Historical Society, the original vault door from the Drennan Federal Building stands against the west wall. The combination dial has been cleaned. The seal is still partially intact along the left edge. Children on school visits touch it. They ask the docent what it is. She tells them it is a door that kept a promise for 18 years, waiting for someone who knew how to listen. The door does not look like much. It never did. The question is not what Clifford Pruitt saw when he looked at it. He saw what any reasonable man sees. Old steel, a frozen dial, $70 of dead weight. The question is what you would have done if you had noticed that seal. Because some things do not announce themselves. They just wait for the right person to come close enough to hear them.